Independent living and its 7 basic needs. Independent living is a philosophy, it's a belief, and it's a belief in your right to live like everybody else. And it's a particular way of thinking. And it is grounded in the social model of disability. Independent living is about having the freedom to have the same choices that everybody else has. It's about choosing what aspects of social, economic, and political life people want to take part in. It's about having control over your life. It's about having a family. It's about getting a meaningful job that is in line with the skills you have. And it's about participating and socializing within your community. It's also about realizing your goals and dreams. And it's also about having access to the 7 basic needs of independent living. Independent living is not about doing things by yourself, for yourself. It is about being in control of how things are done. Mike Oliver tells us that there are 4 main assumptions to independent living. These include that every life is valuable, that all disabled people can choose, that all disabled people have the right to practice control over their lives, and that all disabled people have the right to fully participate. There are 7 basic needs to independent living. These include having access to a personal assistance service if you need it, having access to accessible housing, having access to peer mentoring or peer support, having access to information that is accessible to us, having access to assistive technologies and environmental controls, having access to the built environment, and having access to accessible transport or transport that meets our needs. The core to independent living is having access to a personal assistance service if required.
Personal assistance is a concept that comes out of the disabled people's movement. Rather than being dependent on family members or care workers in an institution, disabled people can live independently in the community, supported by workers who they pay directly and therefore control. Simon Brissenden, independent living pioneer, said, "We need to be clear about what we mean by independence. We're not talking about being able to do everything for yourself. Neither does it imply cutting oneself off from the assistance of others. For what matters is not whether you do something with or without the help of others, but that it gets done under your direction. Being independent simply means that you have some control over your life and that you don't live by the routine of others." Personal assistance avoids dependency. Instead of having to feel grateful to other people for their kindness, disabled people are paying for their service. It's a contractual exchange. The worker gets their wages, the disabled person gets things done which they couldn't do for themselves. Neither party loses out. As a result, personal assistance is empowering. The disabled person can decide who supports them, at what times, and in what ways. They're in control. This is revolutionary and transformational for disabled people. Personal assistance is also flexible. It can be different for different people and on different days. A personal assistant is different from a carer or a health professional. They answer to their employer, the disabled person, and work under their direction.
Another one of the 7 basic needs to independent living is having access to assistive technology if required.
Assistive technology is something that is really central to the art of independent living, as I would think of it. There are so many technologies that we live with today. We either use them ourselves or we have people in our families who use them. And I think modern life in the 21st century presumes that technology is going to be part of how we live. But assistive technology has a particularly important role to play in enabling people to live with greater independence. There are a whole range of assistive technologies available, from alternative ways of using a computer or a tablet device. So using alternatives to your standard keyboard or mouse, using the touch screen, or using, for example, your eyes through eye gaze technologies, as well as communication devices, hardware and software, to enable people whose speech is unclear to communicate more effectively, to, I suppose, the central type of assistive technology that's relevant to independent living, and that is smart home technologies and environmental control technologies. So the difference between those two is very simple. Smart home technologies are all of the mainstream devices that we hear and see in the community, ranging from the Amazon Alexa to smart thermostats to video doorbells, while environmental controls are really the technologies that were designed pre-smart home, specifically for the disability market. So you can imagine, I'm sure the cogs are turning in your brain already, that because they're designed with the disability and the aging market as well in mind, they tend to be more expensive. They also tend to be quite well designed, though, it has to be said. So electronic door openers, for example, intercom systems, these could be examples of environmental control technologies. Increasingly, we're finding that we're recommending smart home technologies for people, but I would caution that some of the cheaper smart home technologies are battery operated only. So, for example, we got very excited when we saw some infrared solutions or and radio solutions, like wireless switches, for example, wireless lights in IKEA, and they're great. But they run out of battery, and what do you do if you've got nobody nearby who can fix that for you? So just a little bit of caution there. But that said, some of those smart technologies are wonderful. And people have found, for example, the Amazon Alexa or Google Home, these voice assistants, to be really, really useful to them. So these are just I suppose, a short sample of the kinds of technologies that can make a huge difference to somebody's ability to live with confidence independently. For example, to be able to call your PA in another room, to be able to spend time on your own. All of the research tells us that smart home technologies enable people to be alone and to not have the presence of a PA or a family member. And that time alone is actually hugely important to our psychological well-being. That's just a human condition, that we do all need time on our own. But also just the ability to check who's at the door without having to go to the door, using an intercom system, or the ability to turn on and off your light from your bed, to change the channels on your TV, or to select what music you want to listen to. All of these very everyday functions can be controlled using smart home technologies. They can also be hugely important in education. We see people using literacy support apps, using software that allows all of the text to be read aloud. These are just two examples of educational support apps. And in the workplace, we're seeing very similar solutions, as well as other solutions. Like, for example, for somebody who's vision impaired, the use of JAWS as a screen reader can make the difference between being able to secure employment and not. But there are other types of assistive technologies. There's just such a broad range that there's no great advantage in trying to go through them all now. What I would say to you is that we have a lot of online resources available. So for any of you who are interested, I would recommend that you can go to our website, that's enableireland.ie/AT. You can also go to our e-learning site where we have some free courses, that's enableirelandat.com. We're on Twitter, at and me, or my own personal one is at Long Siobhan, and I do tweet quite a lot about assistive technology. And we also have a blog, atandme.com. And finally, I would recommend freedomtech.ie, which is a website that was developed as part of a joint project between Enable Ireland and the Disability Federation of Ireland, focusing on the development of an assistive technology ecosystem here in Ireland. So I hope that's just a taster of assistive technology, and I would be delighted to hear further from you if you have further queries, but do please have a look at some of those web resources. Many thanks.
Having access to peer mentoring. Peer mentoring is when a more experienced disabled person offers support, advice and guidance to a less experienced disabled person. Peer mentoring can be informal, and ILMI provide formal peer mentoring support. It can also be informal, where one disabled person supports another disabled person around independent living or helping them to realize their goals and dreams. Having access to the built environment, accessible housing and transport are other key basic needs to independent living. Universal design is about designing for everybody. Universal design is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people and not just disabled people, to the greatest extent possible, without the need for adaptation or specialized design. This comes into play when we now talk about accessible environments, accessible housing, accessible transport, even finding and using information. Technologies such as the iPad or the iPhone or Alexa, they are built with everybody in mind, just not disabled people, but have fantastic accessibility features built in. Being able to access information in a format that suits you is another one of the 7 basic needs to independent living. Carer versus personal assistance. The role of family carer is often seen as heroic and self-sacrificing. There is a general view of someone giving up their time to support a partner or family member. Care can often mean just getting on meals, just going to the bathroom, getting washed, getting dressed, getting up, and going to bed. Paid carers and home helps only allows us to survive a half an hour here and there. This is not okay, and this provision of support operates out of the medical model of disability. In care, we are seen and made to feel passive recipients. Carers are often in charge of us. In care, others decide for us. In care, we do not choose who supports us, nor what we do during the day. Having access to a personal assistant is a tool which allows disabled people to live the philosophy of independent living. A PA is paid to do a job. The important aspect of a personal assistance service is that the disabled person chooses who will work with them. A PA always takes the direction from the disabled person and not from a support service or a family member. A PA enables disabled people to truly live their life. We all know that disabled people experience barriers, and they are external. But we still have in our society segregation and institutionalization. But we do know that this is socially constructed, and this can be deconstructed by collective activism. We know that disabled people live in a non-disabled world, and this only perpetuates difference, learned helplessness, and feelings of being a burden and less than. We also know that some disabled people, through no fault of their own, internalize ableism. And this is when a disabled person sees themselves as less worthy and discriminates against themselves and other disabled people by holding the view that disability is something to be ashamed of, or something to hide, or a personal tragedy. Are less than non-disabled people. It can also be about trying to do things by yourself, for yourself, and striving to be so-called independent, even if they struggle. And some disabled people do refuse support when they need it. Denise Lace, in her TED Talk, talks about the feeling of being hammered with shame because she is not so-called independent. She struggled for a long time with asking for help and support. She believed that needing help was a sign of weakness. Why can I just not accept help when offered? Because a voice inside my head still tells me that I need to do things for myself, by myself. Independent living is used and abused by traditional support services, and there is a myth about independence. As humans, we are all interdependent creatures. Needing help and needing support makes us all human. And we all need to realize that we are all temporary, non-disabled people. All of us are interdependent. All of us are dependent on other people. It's what makes us human. We are all gloriously interdependent. Disabled people and non-disabled people. Other barriers to the independent living philosophy include a lack of understanding about the social model of disability, and this includes both disabled people and non-disabled people working in the sector. We don't have a right to a personal assistance service. We still have issues around accessing the built environment. We still have issues around accessing public transport and paying for private transport that has an additional cost because of the adaptation or size of the van or car that we need. We still don't have funding to support disabled people to have the assistive technology and environmental controls that they need to live independently. And this is another additional cost. There is a lack of informal and informal peer mentoring, and ILMI provides some of this support. There's also a lack of accessible housing in both the public and private sector. We have also a resource-based system that everything is means tested. To conclude with other brands.
Independent living is a philosophy and a movement of people with disabilities who work for self-determination, equal opportunities, and self-respect. Independent living does not mean that we want to do everything by ourselves and do not need anybody, or that we want to live in isolation. Independent living means that we demand the same choices and control in our everyday lives that our non-disabled brothers and sisters, neighbors and friends take for granted. We want to grow up in our families, go to the neighborhood school, use the same bus as our neighbors, work in jobs that are in line with our education and interests, and start families of our own. Since we are the best experts on our needs, we need to show the solutions we want, need to be in charge of our lives, think and speak for ourselves just as everybody else. To this end, we must support and learn from each other, organize ourselves, and work for political changes that lead to the legal protection of our human and civil rights. As long as we regard our disabilities as personal tragedies, we will be pitied. As long as we feel ashamed of who we are, our lives will be regarded as useless. As long as we remain silent, we will be told by others what to do. This was my definition. Article 19 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities has a shorter version. It says, living independently and being included in the community with choices equal to others. To reach the goal of independent living, we need, among other things, universal design and personal assistance for everyone who requires it, regardless of age, diagnosis, family situation, or income. Universal design means that the human-made environment, such as buildings, modes of transportation, devices, communications, and the media, are accessible and usable by everyone on equal terms. That's the goal. To get there, we have to do most of the work ourselves. We cannot rely on others. If we sit back and wait for our governments, for social workers, or service providers to fix our problems, we can wait forever. In the past, they've come up with solutions that meet their needs, not our needs. In working for universal design and personal assistance, we need to build strong organizations that are run by experts, that is, persons with disabilities who are accountable to persons with disabilities. Our movement needs members who are eager to work for our noble cause, who are committed to fight the discrimination we still face, who do not tolerate the injustice that is unworthy of our countries. We need our best people work in our organizations, in politics, in the media, in research, business, in the arts. But independent living is much more than working at the national level, more than meeting with politicians, formulating arguments, or initiating research. The most important work for our self-determination takes place at the individual level. Each and every one of us, you and me, have an obligation to make the best of our own individual situation, to the best of our abilities. All of us can learn to take more responsibilities for our lives, to take on more duties within our families, to contribute more to our communities, to be useful, to contribute will make us feel better about ourselves, will increase our self-respect. The more we can do for ourselves and others, the more other people can rely on us, and the more we count in our families and communities. As you change the way you look at yourself, people around you will also look at you differently. When we respect ourselves more, other people will also respect us more and respect our rights more. That's the plan. Now let's work for it. All the best.